Maybe because of those newfound.
Woolridge, the Invisible Man. The Invisible Man, Dennis Woolridge.
Allow me to introduce myself. I'm the Invisible Man. Mr. Contest Master, fellow Toastmasters, and most welcome guests. Few words had greater impact on my life as a 7-year-old than did those. It all began when I was watching a monster movie marathon with some teenage cousins and their friends. It was a long marathon, and every movie monster imaginable was represented. But I wasn't afraid of teenage protectors. At least until the last movie. It chilled the very marrow of my bones. It terrified me in ways that I had never imagined. Maybe you too have seen this horrifying movie. It was entitled, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Okay, maybe it wasn't all that terrifying. But the last few moments really got my attention. You see, Abbott and Costello are rowing away from Monster Island, congratulating each other on their survival, when suddenly, out of nowhere, this disembodied voice says, "Allow me to introduce myself. I am the Invisible Man." Bud jumped out the right side of the boat, Lou jumped out the left side of the boat, and I jumped straight out of my skin. I was so frightened I had to have a nightlight until I was 29. But eventually I outgrew those childhood fears. And it wasn't until later that I came to understand why that had had such a profound effect on me. You see, you could be walking down a dark city alley or through the woods at midnight, and Dracula, Wolfman, Frankenstein, the Mummy could leap out at you, and you would have two options. You could fight, or you could run away. Personally, I would always choose option 2. But the Invisible Man, you wouldn't even know he was there until his hard, cold fingers laid on your shoulder and he squeezed and said, "Hello." Yeah, that still gives me the willies. All of this came back to me not so long ago when I realized that I was becoming the Invisible Man. I grew up in Rosewood Heights, Illinois, in a great house that my parents bought when I was very young. My father kept adding on to it. It had all of these cool features like rooms, closets that interconnected bedrooms. It was like secret passageways. And believe it or not, there was a real cave in the basement. Between our house and the house next door, there was this gnarly little darkwood tree. It had these blood-red leaves on it. But in season, that tree would produce the most beautiful and fragrant pinkish white blossoms. And when the breeze would blow, that tree would dance, and it would prove itself the most beautiful in the neighborhood. Eventually, those blossoms would drop off, and in their place would grow these big red cherries, almost black. And when those would ripen, my buddy Gary and I would sit under or in that tree, and we would eat cherries until we would almost pop. And I tell you, you have never had a more delicious, juicy, delectable sweet fruit than those cherries. Unless, of course, you got one with a worm in it. Gary and I both attended Rosewood Heights Elementary School. It was about a mile from our house, and most of the time he and I would walk together through backyards and up an old dirt road to get to school. We had great adventures together. And eventually we got to ride the bus when we graduated to Roxana Junior High. In 1970, my parents and I moved to Missouri, where I attended and graduated from Cape Girardeau High School. And after a brief and somewhat disastrous flirtation with college, I decided it was time to join the Navy. So I did. And I spent most of my 4 years as a sailor aboard the USS Conningham, a guided missile destroyer out of Norfolk, Virginia. Okay, I'm looking at your faces, and I know what some of you are thinking. What in the heck has all that got to do with turning invisible? just this. All of those places I just described to you no longer exist. Gary and I's homes and that gnarly, beautiful little tree were taken when the nearby municipal airport grew and needed a frontage road. Asbestos was found in the walls and ceiling of my elementary school, and it was torn down. Both my junior high and high school moved when new buildings were built, and the buildings where I had attended classes were changed so drastically that they were absolutely unrecognizable. And a mere 5 years after I was discharged from the Navy, a fire broke out in the boiler room of the Cunningham, and it burned straight up through 4 decks. She was so badly damaged, the Navy decommissioned her, cut her up, sold her for scrap. Even my friend Gary didn't make it out. He was killed in a car accident when we were juniors in high school. All of those milestones of my life, all those landmarks that we measure our progress through those years were gone. They had vanished. And it felt to me as if large parts of me had vanished as well. I was becoming invisible. And then I realized it's not really the places we find ourselves or the faces that we meet in those places. It's the lessons that we learn. It's the experiences we have with those people. It's the culmination of all these things that make us who we are. The morals that provide the foundation of our lives, and the values that are structured. And as long as those things stay here and here, we'll never be invisible. And maybe more importantly, I realized, no matter where you find yourself along life's journey, no matter whose life intersects with yours along the way, it is absolutely paramount that we leave an indelible imprint, a lasting impression, that we are the catalyst for positive change in those places and in those lives. And if you and I will remain true to that goal, when it comes our time, like those milestones of my life, to no longer exist, we needn't worry that anyone we leave behind will ever feel invisible. Mr. Contest